Hey everybody, welcome back to Planet Coaster. I want to take a minute and explain what this video is all about because it's quite a special occasion actually. Recently, as you might know, Frontier went to the Legends of Gaming event in London to show off the game with the help of the lay designer and a bunch of big YouTubers. And what they would do is compete against each other in some parks, but of course they would need some parks to compete in. And that's basically where I got asked to make a park, and that's what this one is made for. And you're pretty much looking at the results of a couple of hours of making that park right now. Now the reason that I'm releasing it at this point is that it was supposed to be a secret until Legends of Gaming is over, which it is now, and I recorded some of the parts of making this park, not all of it. It still took quite a few more hours to make it, but hopefully this video can at least make a cool time lapse and see how the park as a whole kind of comes together. So let's get started. Alright, now something to note here is that I am not going to do anything ridiculous. I know that I have a pretty bad reputation around these parts of doing weird themes and putting way too many objects into my buildings, but I was specifically told to keep it not too crazy on the scenery in this case, especially also because the performance in this park still had to be good while at the same time being a complete finished park surrounding. So the themes of this park are not going to be too complicated, and I'll try to keep the amount of pieces as low as I can. Also, this was made in a very small amount of time and I was kind of stressing out, so it might be a little bit rushed at some parts, and also in general it's just, well, built to be built as quickly as I could, and you'll probably see that come back a lot of the ways that I built things are really just because it's the fastest way to do things. Now into the buildings themselves. The first building that I wanted to start out with is kind of the most important building of at least this part of the park. Basically what you're looking at right now is the entrance plaza, which is not too big. It is not going to be too large of a park, but I wanted to have some kind of big eye-catching building for the entrance plaza. Not really a castle or something really big, but just one building that kind of stands out from the rest and gives it a sort of oomph to it. And that's really why I figured I would go for a somewhat larger building with a clock tower, just to give it that nice accent. And reason also why I did this and why it's kind of to the side of the plaza, which is a bit unusual, is that I had to leave 2 empty spaces in the middle of the park for the people to actually be able to build on. So it kind of had to be a finished environment where you could just build whatever you wanted to in the middle in an unfinished empty grass plot. So I couldn't really fill up all of the sides here, and I didn't want to make a centerpiece myself, which is why it's kind of a building that's a bit brushed to the side. But yeah, that's the first building, and the rest of the buildings are more or less going to follow this same sort of alpine fantasy-like theme. It doesn't really take the concepts and pieces of the game and uses them for different reasons, so I'll be just using roofs as roofs, walls as walls, and chimneys as actual chimneys in this case, and I won't go too crazy with combining all of the different pieces to make new things, which means that I can get stuff done a bit quicker and don't have to worry as much about the performance, but it also means that the theme of this really is going to be this standard kind of alpine fantasy theme, which I'm quite happy with. But the reason why I usually try to avoid it is just because it doesn't use the pieces in the game in too innovative ways, which means that as you sort of progress over time and more people build more parks, they all start looking like each other. So this is probably not going to look like the most unique parks, and more like a sort of general representation of what parks in Planet Coaster can look like. The second house, by the way, is, well, really what the rest of the houses are going to be like, and what the middle house is going to be like as well. Just a simple gable roof, though in this case I did want to extend it with that second part at the back of the building, just to give it a bit more body than just being a simple facade for the side of a main street. Also, all of these buildings will be just proper buildings and not just facades of a main street, so that's not really going to happen anyway. But at least this backside of the building adds a bit of depth to it, which I'm quite happy with. What I'm also really happy with actually, and what is one of the more defining features of the otherwise pretty simple building, is that chimney on the side, which is actually made out of a bunch of different chimneys, all kind of stacked together. There isn't really a huge chimney that you can have on the side of the building in the game, that could just come from the bottom floor all the way up to the roof. So I figured I had to make it myself, and I'm actually quite happy with how it works out. The chimneys do combine pretty well into new kind of chimneys or other objects if you so desire. But the next building that I wanted to get into is the final building, which, being sort of the middle building of the main street, is more or less just filler and kind of the unwanted filling middle space in the main street that nobody really cares about, but you would kind of see a gaping hole if there wasn't a building there. So this is not going to be too interesting, just, well, keeping with the theme that I already have over here, taking a few new pieces, but more or less making sure that I kind of have a filler that fits in with the buildings that are already there. And also it does help to give all of these things a function, since I'm not going to have a big main street or anything, and I do want to make sure that all of the basic functions that you want to see in a park are actually present here. So the big building is the information building, the small building in the middle is the Cosmic Cow, which is not too Cosmic Cowish. There's not a lot of different billboards and Cosmic Cow merchandise on the front of the building. It's a little bit subtle, but I think it works out quite well. And the building on the right is the toilet building. I'm not sure why, but I do really feel like it's a toilet building looking building. Not really sure what would make it qualify as that, but that's just what I kind of feel about it. Anyway, I also wanted to make a quick centerpiece for the plaza, but I didn't want to spend too much time on it. So what I ended up doing is just put random kind of decorations with flowers into the ground. I would usually want to blend this out a bit more and not go with random things, but this is just a bit of doodling and coming up with very quick ways to arrange them on the spot. This is not the most realistic way to arrange flowers, but I'm still quite happy with how it looks. And the final thing that I still had to do is get in some benches and some lights, and that finishes the main plaza. Then I did a bit more work on the pathworks and add some attractions to the park. And the next thing that I wanted to do is add a very big restaurant, which is going to be the biggest building of the park, and really the centerpiece restaurant kind of function of the park. And as such, it's going to be super wide, and it's not going to be too complicated, since I wanted to save quite a bit of time here. So as you can see, a lot of this building is just making small modular pieces that you can copy around to make a really big building very quickly. So the roof is all just made out of those pieces that can be copied. There are the wooden posts all around it, which was quite easy to make as well. And all of the walls on other sides are also going to be copied around, since they are just going to be the same piece, and I don't have too many different parts sticking out with different styles and different ways of making it throughout the entire building. Just because this is a lot easier for me, obviously. And because of that, the building does turn out to have a very bland kind of standard shape to it. Just that very long rectangular part of the main body and one roof that just sticks out to make it look a bit more inviting, but it's still super standard and boring. So I wanted to add one touch to it to at least give it a bit of character, which is the tower on the side. Don't want to decorate it with anything else, don't want to detract from the tower, but that's really the only thing that gives the building a bit of a unique look and something that's a bit more recognizable than just a simple roof and some simple walls. And just for good measure, I did want to make sure that the details at least are good on this building, since especially if you have a building with such a standard shape, I always like to add a bit more attention into the small details and make sure that it's all as clean as possible, which does help make the building look a bit more interesting, even though it is quite a simple building. Now the one thing that does add a bit of character to it is the tower, which I'm working on right here. Still, I didn't want to make it fairly quickly, so I just made one side of it and copied that around and put a big simple roof on it and pretty much played it safe for the entire building, not doing anything crazy. Was playing around a little bit with like some different decorations for underneath the clock, but nothing really turned out to work that well, and I definitely wanted to keep some parts of this clock tower still empty. And the roof, which is really the most defining feature of the entire building, is also slightly different color, with the green part sticking out there to give it a bit more detail and make it more interesting than the rest of the building. And that is really what I quite like about it. Also, one thing to consider about this is that even though it is a very simple building right now, and it looks like just one very large rectangular boring facade, I will have some trees in front of it, which kind of block it out, which doesn't necessarily mean that the building is going to be better, but that's kind of the idea that I wanted to make this building with. So you're going to be able to see this building from the main square, and it's also sitting right next to the 2 empty grass spaces that are supposed to be built in, and as such it should kind of come up behind the trees, as you've also seen at the beginning of this video, and mostly just get your attention to the clock tower and leave the rest of the building just be the functional part of it. Just very quickly, also having the same wall around the entire building, which I normally wouldn't want to do either. Want to find some kind of way to at least make the back of the building look a bit more backstage, and like it's actually a functional backside where you could load things into the building and such things. But in this case I had to be quite quick about it, so it's just a simple backside which is practically the same as the front, except without the roof that sticks out. Then I did a bunch more work on some different flat rides and scenery around the park, which you can also kind of see as I move around there, and there's even a bit of foliage. But the next thing that I wanted to do, which was the interesting thing that I still wanted to show, was make a coaster. And this went super easy actually. I do have to say this is one of the first coasters that I made in Alpha 3. The only coasters that I've made so far are a couple very small test coasters kind of, but I haven't actually made a serious coaster so far except for the flying coaster in Fantasy Valley. And this was kind of my first play with how it would work, and I do have to say, as a personal critique, I do think that friction on the track is way too bad. I'm still quite happy with how this layout turned out. I didn't actually test it, I was just hoping that my too many years of experience in these kinds of games would make sure that this layout would run through the entire thing and still have some good speed on the airtime hills, but even still it was a bit slower than I expected, and I definitely have to say that the friction right now in the game just seems too low to be realistic. But still, playing with that, I just made this layout to seem like a realistic B&M hyper. I'm not actually sure if it's technically a hyper. It doesn't look like it really breaks the 200 feet. But it's the hyper kind of coaster in any case. It's also an older version since I wanted to have a pre-drop on it. No particular reason why I wanted to have a pre-drop. It just kind of seemed like something that would look good on the coaster. So I went with it, and it's just the kind of coaster that I wanted to add to get a skyline in the background that would put the rest of the park into a more theme park-like mood. It's not really the most imaginative coaster, and I pretty much just came out with the layout as I was going around it, so it isn't really anything particularly unique or creative, but it's something that just helps get a larger kind of thrilling ride in the background, and you can see it from practically every part of the park. It just makes the rest of the park look like it's more of a part of a theme park, which is why I wanted to add a hyper coaster in the first place. And quickly finishing that up, also here's how I did much of the foliage, just saving a bunch of trees in a blueprint, which isn't always the most performance great idea, because you might have a few trees that overlap and some bushes underneath it that aren't exactly necessary, but in this case it saved a lot of time, and I definitely recommend it if you do want to be very quick about it. Though in general I do want to mix up foliage in different parts of parks, so I'm not usually a big fan of copying foliage around, but if you want to get things done quickly, it's a great way to do so. And the rest of the foliage is just very simple, a bunch of decorative trees in some different arrangements to make everything look a bit more fancy, but there's no rocket science going on there. Also, there were just some parts of the park that I couldn't finish, at least not really in a very interesting way, so that I in the end just ended up filling with more foliage. In this case, I felt like it maybe would have been cool to have a flat ride behind the big restaurant building over here and make that area next to the coaster a little bit more interesting, but there wasn't really any time for it, and I wanted to focus on some different things instead, so decided to in the end just put a quick toilet building in here and let the foliage do the rest of the filling up work. The toilet building is quite interesting though, just a very quick building to kind of fit in with the theme but still look like it's a small toilet stall instead of really a themed building. a little bit inspired by the Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 toilet buildings, if that's not a too stupid thing to say. But there's not too much inspiration going on there. It's just a similar kind of toilet building. I do still love that thing a lot. And have a quick hedge run at the back of it to kind of separate it from that forest behind it, and also make sure that you can't really go there because that's just backstage and unfinished area, and you don't want people to see the unfinished area. Moving on though, the next thing that I wanted to do is get a pirate ship in, which is just a thing that I wanted to do because it looks very fancy, and it's always nice to have one of these things beside a lake. It's a very picturesque kind of thing, and it's really one of those safe ways to do certain things. If you want to have a flat ride that looks cool, just make a pirate ship, put it next to a lake, have a bunch of rocks and foliage, and maybe a building next to it, and it's bound to look good. So that's what I'm going for here. And I had this queue thing already copied from 2 other rides that I made earlier, so there is a lot of copying things to save time here. But I did want to add a specific touch to it every time, and in this case I wanted to add a tower next to the pirate ship, which turned out to be a bit more annoying than I figured beforehand, since the pirate ship is something that I completely forgot about here, and it is almost going to hit the tower. So I had to do a bit of building gymnastics to make sure that the tower would just stay lower than the pirate ship when it swings, but it's right about in the safe zone. So I'm quite happy with how the tower works out on the side there. And just to get rid of that very mechanical looking orange color of the base of the ride, I wanted to have a bunch of rockwork underneath it. And I'll put some foliage in there as well to spruce it up a bit and make it look a bit more finished. But this is like one of the last big things that I still did in the park. Now almost at the end, some of the finishing touches is adding details, and over here you can already kind of see what the park is looking like in its almost finished state. These are really the final touches of foliage and scenery around all of the paths that I have, and this is more or less what it turned into. I want to end this video with a couple of cinematic shots to just give you another idea of what the park looks like in the end. And yeah, that is just about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time, in which hopefully I'll be back to Fantasy Valley or some kind of other project. See you guys.